Hi, Brenda. It's just really exciting to be able to do this interview with you. And I just want to tell the viewing folks that the reason that I see you as an important legacy is because before you was Lee Campbell, who started Concerned United Birth Parents and was addressing the needs of those birth first mothers, particularly, and fathers eventually, who had placed and closed adoptions and the impact on them. But you came along a few years later and you began to represent, give voice to, in a very powerful way, even before you were a clinician yourself, to those birth first parents involved in very open adoptions. And you then became a legacy for a whole other group of voices that I wanted to make sure that we could capture. So I hope that you're comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. I want to start out by saying that each of us would love to be able to introduce ourselves in some way that resonates with who we are today. And I wondered if you might share with the folks watching this clip some things about yourself that you'd like them to know professionally.
So, in terms of my history, uh, I I I started out writing. I started out speaking because there was nothing else available,
Yeah.
and I had some skill at that, and I felt like it was really important that because we were kind of pioneering this, that there be something in writing, something for birth first parents to be able to just go to when they had questions. And for a while, I had an 800 number. I got a lot of calls from people all over the country, just kind of trying to figure it out because it was all so new.
Yes.
And I was trying to figure it out too. But I also did a lot of research. I made sure that everything I put out there was not just my opinion, but also was based in research and fact and theory.
Yes. Yes. Well, your bulletins, your little magazines that you put out were just wonderful. Do you know I've kept them to even to today,
Oh,
because they're just full of good information. And so move us forward a little bit. So you started out really being the voice of the birth first family from the very open adoption community.
right, right. Um, and that was within 3 years of my son being born. So a lot of it was just trying to figure out what people needed, what I needed, because I also wanted community, and there was not a lot to be found out there. I did go to a couple of cub meetings, and I was told by many there that I had it too good and I didn't have a right to grieve and all
Oh,
of those things. So again, I went to the literature, right, and I found Pauline Boss and the ambiguous loss um, framework, and I found all the stuff on grief
yeah.
and loss, and how sometimes even intentional loss can be even more difficult to process and difficult to grieve. So yeah, I was looking for a community, and from that I kind of started a little publishing company just to publish a lot of this stuff. And I started and from that it became a nonprofit, and um uh we did some conferences and things like that just to get people together. A lot of it is really about keeping people together. And even though I can't even remember the last Life Givers Festival I did, but we have a Facebook group, and we still keep in contact with each other. We still support each other. It's been a lovely, lovely community.
And you wrote a book called Life Givers, didn't you?
Well, no. I wrote a birth parents book of memories, which
Yeah.
is kind of like a fill in the blank journal. I wrote four little booklets because I felt like people thinking about adoption didn't have a whole lot to go to. I mean, there's tons of books for adopting parents, right? But
Right.
there was nothing for birth parents. So I felt like the format of a booklet was a little bit easier when you're in crisis to read, to assimilate. And so I did those four. And they did pretty well. I think they got into the hands of people that needed to have them. And I hope to put them online in a free PDF for people soon. So,
Oh, good. That would be so exciting. Yes. And how did you end up being a clinician? What was that journey?
well, so, after a while of working with birth parents and working with adoptive parents, I also felt like I really wanted to work with the kids.
Mm.
And I knew if I wanted to work with children, I would need more education. So I went back and got my MSW in 2002. Yeah, I've been working with kids in trauma, and I work with adults as well. Trauma's gotten to be my kind of niche. Yeah, and I've been doing that ever since.
Do you think that niche that you've landed in had anything to do with your own trauma as
Oh,
a
absolutely.
uh-huh.
Absolutely. I think in the beginning I was resistant to think of it as traumatic. But absolutely. Anytime you separate a mother and child, it is traumatic. And I was able to process my trauma in different ways, but I also wanted to get other kinds of interventions for the people I was working for. So I focused on. I do a lot of different things. I do somatic healing. I do. I do sometimes I do TFCBT, not too much anymore. I did SitCap. Are you familiar with that?
Well, even if I
Sensory
was, yeah, as I said, even if I was, watchers might not be. So go ahead and
Yeah. So
explain it.
SitCap is sensory interventions for teens, parents, and children. And it's just a very sensory way of processing trauma, right? And that's all of what we do. So I did EMDR training, and I just in the last 2 or 3 years, I've done become a hypnotherapist. And
Okay.
I love hypnotherapy. I can use it for so many different things and so many ways of just helping people to learn how to really relax and tap into. I think for me, both the MDR and hypnotherapy have been really, really helpful. But for some people, they can't be activated like that, and they can't have that uncomfortable activation. So hypnotherapy fills a void with that.
And then you moved and you took a real leadership position in Georgia. Uh,
Well, I moved, and I everybody was, pushing me towards, including Leslie McKinnon. She was just pushing me towards doing a private practice. And yeah, and I ended up doing that. Um, and I got involved with the Georgia Society of Clinical Social Workers and became their professional ed chair 1 week after the pandemic shut down. Luckily, I have a very techie husband who helped me with going virtual with all of that. And yeah, it's been quite a ride.
yeah, yeah. And you're quite a good leader and you're calm. And I think that serves both your clients and your colleagues.
I think my daughter would beg to differ. In fact, this is a great story. So I was telling her, this was, this about 10, 15 years ago. She was about 16 years old. And I said, Katerina, many people at work come to me when there's a crisis because they know that I'm calm and I'll handle it well. And she just said, really. I use that often when I'm talking about how people have different personas
Yes.
in their family, in their professional life, and socially, we all bring ourselves in different ways.
And that's a good example of being a real person at home, and you bring your professional self out into the world. And we
Right.
all walk that fine line, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up one of six children, and my mother had six kids in 8 years. So it
Oh.
was chaos always. I mean, it was total chaos when I was growing up. And the only way to be heard was to be loud. So we had this very loud family where everybody was, yelling all the time. So that's I think a bit of my I think people are surprised when they find out I can be a yeller.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, you had to find your place in a large family. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Brenda, we've been talking about trauma and your practice, and you must have a real affinity to two populations, particularly one being um, parents who are considering not being everyday parents to their children, and the other, perhaps, the children who are growing up in open adoption. I don't know whether they come into your practice as well, but I wonder if you would have some words of wisdom for the folks viewing this interview.
Well, so I told you I had an 800 number, and a lot of the work I did in that beginning phase was working with parents considering adoption. So I would get calls. I actually had a run-in with an agency that must not be named, and they she had not signed anything, and they were threatening to call CPS and not give her child back. And that was one of my really great successes, because I was able to gather the troops and get her a layette and get her a car seat and get her child back in her arms.
And
So
you said something, Brenda, that I think there may be people viewing this who could be a little bit confused. And I just want to reaffirm that individuals are parents of a child until they actually sign their legal relinquishments. And so we're referring to men or women who may be thinking about adoption,
right.
but who haven't yet completed the legal process. Because I think sometimes people don't think about it in that way. They automatically think about the birth parent and not the parent.
Right, right. Because there's even this reluctance for people in the adoption community when a parent is considering adoption to call them mom or dad, to give them that title. And I've always believed that pregnancy is parenting, and choosing adoption is probably, and signing those relinquishment papers is the last parenting decision that you're going to make. It doesn't make you any less of a mother or father. It's the last parenting decision you're going to make, right?
Yes.
So I think it's important to put it in that framework, and given that you're making decisions based on as much information as you can. And that's where I find a real lack. I do this on a regular basis. I'll ask an adoption agency, show me what you give your adoptive parents and show me what you give your expectant parents considering adoption, right? Yes. I ask them that.
Yes.
Always there is a big difference in what people get, and the information they receive, and even that their child might have issues with adoption growing up, right? Yes. In my practice, I see all kinds of international adoption, closed adoption. I see all kinds of kids who have been adopted. I see some adults who have also been adopted, and I see a lot of people in reunion. So yeah, since Leslie left Georgia, and another person kind of left the therapeutic relation, therapy, I've been getting a lot of referrals because there's not a whole lot of people who really specialize in it. But
Could you mention Leslie twice?
right,
Leslie McKinnon is
right. She is a birth parent who it was in Georgia, who's done a lot for the community, who's done a lot of who's been in the therapeutic community for decades. Okay. And she moved shortly, probably a couple of years after I got here.
Okay. So she's a birth mother, a licensed clinician, right, and somebody who placed in a closed system, but has opened those relationships. Right. Because if we're going to reference somebody, we need to explain.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Who's moved up into the mountains, North Carolina. Yeah. But still available. Thank you. I just wanted to back up on that. So, you were saying a minute ago how important it was that everybody realized that until that baby's real and born and held and seen, it's not real. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, there are some people who, because of the gravity of the situation, some people have hid their pregnancies, some people who have numbed themselves, some people who can't quite see their rolling belly as a baby. And so seeing your child, holding your child, understanding that this little person is connected to you is so very important. And I think that decision just needs to be remade on a number of times during the process. And unfortunately, that's not always the case, because a lot of places will say, oh, well, these prospective adoptive parents are going to be so disappointed, and do you want to be part of that heartbreak? And it's like, well, what's happening between the parent and the child? There's going to be a lot of heartbreak for both of them if a decision is pushed and not made in the child's best interest, and in the birth parent's best interest. I think this is really important, that too often, birth parents first parents are either vilified or they're put on this pedestal. And that's really, actually, I think, very convenient, because if you're, pardon my language, a whore, or if you're an angel, neither one of those are decidedly human and have their own needs and have their own desires and their own need for relationship, right? If it's always about, so sometimes I think it's important that I'm very child-centered adoption, but I think it's really important that everybody in this constellation needs to be given some footing, right? And too often it is, because if you're a selfless angel, you're always going to be sacrificing, and if you're not, you're kind of, you shouldn't be in the life of a child, right? So it's too convenient, these kind of stereotypes that are out there.
And I think we've had great hopes. There's no way to do any adoption without pain, no matter how open or closed it might be. And we have no prediction as to what any particular child will make of their life circumstance as they move into adulthood.
Right.
So there isn't a be all and an end all to any type of adoption. But as you work with children and you see some that come through that are in totally closed versus very open adoptions where they are in connection with their family of origin, do you see any difference in the work that you do or the challenges that are put before you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with open adoption brings its own challenges, right? Where children might um, see birth family and want more of them, or see birth family struggling and want to help and
Mhm.
feel overly privileged because they're not in the same situation that their birth family are in, you know. What I've been seeing also is that, you know, like myself, where I was at 24 and where I'm at now is there's a vast difference, right? And my ability to parent, because I went on and I had two children, um, 8 years after my son was born, and then again, um, 11 years after my son was born. I have two children I parented, and I did that very well, if I do say so myself. But that's hard for an adoptive person to see, right? It's like, well, if they're such a great parent, why couldn't they parent me?
Right.
And yet who I was at 24 was not the person I was at 32 when I had my daughter, and the person I was at 35 when I had my son. And I certainly didn't have that partner that was totally in it with me, you
Yes.
know, when I was 24. So I think seeing that as a child is growing up can be really difficult, I think, and difficult, and because developmentally they might not be able to, you know, for that abstract thinking that's needed for that.
Right. Thank you. That's great. Um, you mentioned coming from a large family and what strengths that has given you. What other things do we want to know about you that have nothing to do with your being a birth first mother or a mother or a wife or um, coming from a large family? What other things make you tick? What gives you joy? What do you bring to balance your life?
Well, I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been intensely curious,
Ah,
right? I've always been intensely curious, and I really believe that curiosity is probably anybody's greatest strengths, because it takes you places, right? That has you constantly asking why or why not, you
yeah.
know, and that why not has taken me to a lot of places. Um, because yeah, I'm constantly growing, and that's really a wonderful thing. And the so that curiosity probably is the most important piece of me that makes me tick and gives me joy, because it and also the why not. So when people walk into my office, there's a lot of toys, there's a dollhouse, there's, you know, it's kind of whimsical looking. I have these two big baskets of like fidgets and balls and you know, all kinds of stuff, because I love toys.
Yeah.
That's going to be my next profession. I'm going to work in a toy store. But and people will often ask me, they'll say, you know, if you didn't work with kids, what would your office look like? And I said, probably pretty similar. The dollhouse might not be there, but I love toys, and I embrace that childlike part of me, you know. I like to blow bubbles, and you know, I think that you don't have to be a child to experience play, you know. So
Yes. Oh, I love that curiosity piece. And what I remember about you are the wonderful tea parties you used to give for your daughter, and how creative you were. So you've been playing all along, which is lovely.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
I just had a tea party.
oh, you did.
Yeah, I just had a tea party. So I continue.
Um, you know, as you move towards your later years, and I think you'll forever be, in my mind, very childlike, very wise, but very childlike. Your giggle and everything about you is just wonderfully joyful. But as you move towards the ends of your life, or before you go to work for a toy store after you leave your career, and you're thinking about what you'd like people to maybe put on your gravestone or say about you as a eulogy, what do you want to have people say that would make you feel like your life had meaning?
I think often, maybe on my gravestone, it could say it was always about the little things, because it always is about the little things, right? It's about, you know, helping someone who dropped something. It's about smiling at someone. It's about telling the cashier that she doesn't need to rush, that you're okay, and it's just showing those little bits of kindness, right? And little gifts, it's always about the little things for me. And that adds up. That little stuff adds up, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Are there any final words? I mean, pieces of wisdom. These people are watching you. Maybe they're new clinicians, maybe they're adoptive parents, maybe they're parents who are thinking about adoption, maybe there are people who place their children, but you really want them to know something from your wisdom. Are there some things of wisdom you'd like to leave them with? I mean, you've given us a lot of wisdom, so I do want you to understand. I hear that. But are there things we haven't talked about that you'd like to share?
I think people have forgotten how to talk to one another and how to listen to one another. And I think one of the reasons, I have parents who say, God, she just loves coming here, right? Or he just loves coming. I love coming here. Well, the reason why is because I ask questions and I listen. I not only do I listen, but I give them I give them something back where they know they've been heard,
Oh,
right?
perfect. Yes.
Because being heard is so important. And it doesn't even have to be like, I'll often ask parents, do you know what their favorite color is? Do you know? My daughter and I are doing this interactive journal, and
Oh,
we're asking each other questions like this because as parents, when they're little, you always know what their favorite color is, or what music they're into or whatever, but you don't necessarily know that as you grow older. And here's the things: relationships are never anything to take for granted. They always require attention. And that's probably the most important thing I want people to come away with, is that hopefully I've given my relationships the attention they need, which, to be honest, sounds a little strange given that I don't talk to my son that I placed. And I think it's important that I bring that up, because somewhere along the way, there's a hurt that I caused. There's a hurt inside him that finds it difficult for us to connect. And I think that's so important, because you would think, I mean, I thought I did everything, right? I thought I was mindful. I thought I was, but there's something, and maybe we'll find our way back to each other. I hope so. But I think it's really important that even in the best circumstances, the trauma of separation can be too much.
Oh, Brenda, I so appreciate you. I so appreciate this interview. Um, Keep on doing what you're doing on all levels. That's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And thank you. Have a good rest of the day and rest of the week.
And thank you for this. I always love speaking with you.
Thank you very much.